Well, Blizzard announced a heck of a lot with World of Warcraft, and I suppose it's time I comment on it. My original hope was to do another Professions video. Okay, another engineering video. And that's because during patch 10.1, Blizzard has done something that they have a sad tendency to do, but that is another video. As far as their announcements go, well, this script ended up pretty rambly, which just goes to show it's better if you create an outline before making one of these kinds of videos. And I should know that by now, but it's been so long since my last World of Warcraft video that I have managed to forget. Anyhow, Blizzard has also done something that they have a tendency not to do, which is to announce 3 expansions all at once. That is very much unprecedented. It's always been one expansion at a time with some hints in the storyline and lore about what the story and setting of that next expansion is going to be, right up until they announce it. But then again, it's probably smart that they're doing this now. I won't lie. I am playing World of Warcraft less often than I ever have before, or at least I was before 10.2 came out. Maybe that was because I didn't see the story going anywhere, at least not in a way that my gameplay helps to push forward. Maybe it's because I finally figured out the gear upgrading systems of Dragonflight and gotten my gear about as far as the patch would let me to get it. Or maybe I've played the heck out of Zaralek Caverns and Erebus in Looking for Raid. I don't know, but I found myself playing less now than I did during Warlords of Draenor's long content drought, which is too bad. The 2 things that I care about most in the game, which are class design and professions, are better than they've been in a long time. So I should be enjoying those things instead of doing nothing. But letting me know that there are things to look forward to and a consistent story that, unlike Shadowlands, Blizzard is actually committed into delving into is definitely a good thing. And yes, that is a segue to delves. And delves are perfect for casuals who do a lot of world content like me. I certainly hope that Blizzard learns their lessons from the awesomeness that was Torghast so they can recreate that awesomeness with delves. Honestly, I love the ability to explore procedurally generated areas in Torghast, even if there was a limit to the number of set pieces and rooms that Torghast included. There were still rewards, even if small ones, for going out and exploring every nook and cranny, and I'm hoping delves can be the same way. Of course, Torghast for me was ruined in the middle of the expansion by the gemstone rating system that basically forced me to speedrun when I really wanted to explore in Torghast instead of speedrunning. Hopefully delves will at least have some options that appeal to me vis-a-vis exploration, and I'll be permitted to find my own fun in delves instead of being forced into a particular kind of gameplay. Take it from me. I've known since I was a kid that activities that are forced are, by that very fact, not fun. And the zones in the War Within, they're all over the place. That kind of reminds me of Cataclysm. Cataclysm zones were spread across the eastern kingdoms in Kalimdor, and there were even some in the ocean. I suppose it would work pretty well if the zones for War Within were similarly spread across the existing continents, since that would or could make the original zones in World of Warcraft at least a little relevant again, even if you just need to fly over them to get to War Within's content. I'm especially interested in Hallowfall. Who knows what that giant light crystal even is? Could it be to Azeroth what Oshu'gun was to Draenor? Do the Light and Order have even more in common than we think? And who knows? Being in that Hallowfall zone might just let me get my hands on some holy elemental reagents for professions. I really can't do a video without harping on elemental reagents for professions, can I? On the subject of professions, it feels like they kind of capped out on the quality of the profession talent trees, and the only thing they can do now is either attach War Within's profession talents to new features, or shuffle around which talents are where, like, I don't know, maybe each type of war has its own talent progression that lets you mine gems, or maybe even 2 talents like that, one for uncommon level gems and one for rare. There's plenty of room for improvement with professions in general, but the talents, I think, feel like they're about as good as they're going to get without adding new features. I really, really like that they took all of the complexity out of the old player power systems and shoved that complexity into professions, where it can do some actual good and make things interesting instead of forcing players into content grinds for player power. And it's my hope that Blizzard keeps profession talents as a thing in War Within, in approximately, if not exactly, the form they're in today in Dragonflight. But what I really wanted to focus on and go in depth in this video about is the hero talents. To reduce my feelings on them to a blurb, I'd say that I like the general concept of optional talent trees where each spec has an overlapping choice of 2 trees to dive into, but based on what they've shown us, their implementation of that concept is lackluster. And I have to be real careful how I say what I'm about to say because there is a problem, but it's not about what's in the hero talents so much as what isn't in the hero talents that's the problem. I mean, let's have a look at the Keeper of the Grove talents. The theme of the tree is treants, and that's not a bad thing in and of itself. Treants are a very druidish thing to focus on, indeed a very Keeper of the Grove-ish thing. And the passives in there are quite powerful and great for min-maxing your treants, but passives do not a fun game make. There are no, I repeat, no active abilities in this hero talent tree. You'd think they'd bring back, for example, Hurricane, and set things up so that treants getting watered by your Hurricane spell would become more effective, or maybe they'd cast a spell of their own upon getting rained on, or something. Maybe those could be mutually exclusive pick one of 2 talents. But if I had to guess, Blizzard is once again at the point where they've thrown a lot of abilities at the players, seen how little open space there is on our spell bars, and are deciding to hold back on adding new abilities. I have seen this before. They reached this point in Mists of Pandaria when they started merging abilities together and making abilities spec-specific instead of class-specific, which was really annoying for a soloing healer like me to lose abilities like Holy Wrath, Consecration, and Inquisition, but I've griped about that for over a decade, and I should really give it a rest, especially now that they've pretty well solved the problems I was griping about. But back to Blizzard being shy about adding new abilities. Back in Warlords of Draenor, they did something similar to this first draft of hero talents when passives were what they handed us as we leveled up in Warlords, instead of giving us the new abilities every few levels that we'd gotten in the Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, and Cataclysm. Honestly, I think giving us no active abilities at all in these hero talents is a mistake. Passives aren't a bad reward in and of themselves as long as they're accompanied by nice, new, flashy, rotation-changing active abilities. Now, I'm not going to deny that lack of space on our spell bars is a problem, but Soul So Breezy and I each independently came up with more or less the same perfect solution to spellbar bloat. Soul called them mods and I called them upgrades, but the basic concept is the same, replacing one ability with another ability that acts as a variation of or modification to the ability that's being replaced. This way, the same number of slots on your spellbar are taken up, but new abilities are getting added to the game that have new and different flavor, animations, and functions. For example, that Hurricane concept? Hurricane could, in theory, replace the Sunfire ability, which is a multi-target damage over time spell. Granted, this would require that enemies stay in one place to take the full damage from Hurricane, and Sunfire is the sort of thing that doesn't have that problem, but that's one of the trade-offs that upgrades or mods ought to have when you think about it. Blizzard can and should add active abilities in these hero talents, even if they are just replacements for existing abilities. Really, we need active abilities to provide the flavor and excitement that something like hero talents should be adding to the game. And there are a bunch of Diablo abilities that are just begging to be pulled into World of Warcraft that could show up in these hero talents. I mean, how exactly did the awesomeness that is Wave of Light from Diablo 3 not make it into World of Warcraft during Mists of Pandaria? Monks being able to get their hands on Wave of Light through these hero talents would just plain be awesome. You know exactly where I'm going with this next. Let me show you some examples of what I think would work well for Paladins. Now, the 3 hero talent trees are Lightsmith, Herald of the Sun, and Templar. I figure Templar is the Protection and Retribution tree, Lightsmith is the Holy and Protection tree, and Herald is the Retribution and Holy tree. Since pulling in Diablo abilities is one of my goals here, let's talk about what Diablo abilities a Paladin might get that don't already have some kind of equivalent. Well, there's the 3 damage auras from Diablo 2, there's Fist of the Heavens, there's Holy Bolt, there's Condemn from Diablo 3 along with Shield Glare, there's Smite, which It's actually two different abilities in Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, and the name is taken if nothing else, and the Diablo 3 one is the only one that really makes sense, but let's keep moving. There's a Falling Sword, Phalanx, Heaven's Fury, and Bombardment from Diablo 3, and I cannot see conversion jumping in. I think we've already got something very much like Zeal, or at least we used to, so not much point in pulling that one in. So let's go through each of the 3 hero talent trees and see what we can pull in and still have things work and make sense. And I'll start with Herald of the Sun, probably because it's right up my alley, seeing as how I'm a soloing healer, and since pulling in Diablo 3 abilities is one of my goals, and since we're talking about a tree that combines damage and healing, I'd say Holy Bolt and Fist of the Heavens make the most sense for what to add. Flash of Light would be a great spell to get upgraded to Holy Bolt, and Judgment would be great for Fist of the Heavens. The Diablo 2 version of Fist of the Heavens actually sent Holy Bolts at nearby targets, which could heal your allies, so adding a passive talent that heals allies near your Fist of the Heavens target would be awesome, except that Judgment already has a talent that heals allies near the impact, so maybe something else like applying the Tears Deliverance healing buff to those allies would work. A healing talent after Fist of the Heavens could really contrast with a more pure damage talent, like the Charged Bolts that Diablo 3's version of Fist of the Heavens sends out. Though it's hard to picture Retribution choosing a healing talent or Holy choosing a damage talent outside of soloing Holy, or Retribution receiving some kind of significant damage buff from healing allies. Then again, a passive talent that takes all the healing you do and makes your auto attacks deal damage based on that healing would be right up Herald's alley. Or maybe the Charged Bolts could cascade the on-hit effects that Judgment normally has, making it a trade-off for Holy between longer-lasting healing or more instant group healing. Now I'm just spitballing here. Holy Bolt should have something over Flash of Light besides being able to cast it on enemies to deal damage. Or maybe it should be something that just plain and simple has a trade-off. Maybe it's a bigger heal with a higher mana cost, or maybe it would be usable instantly more often or something. I don't know. On the subject of instant cast, a Retribution Paladin would never use a timed cast ability like Holy Bolt unless there was no other way to deal damage, or unless something like a Paladin equivalent of Rhyme or Maelstrom Weapon could make Holy Bolt instant. Probably there'd need to be a passive talent in the tree that would allow Holy Bolt to become instant cast under some circumstances, like a stacking buff that makes it instant at 5 or 7 stacks or something like that. And yes, those of you who have seen this channel before know that I am still pining for a ranged damage spell with no cooldown, even after the video I had about Denounce. I've changed my mind since then, especially since Blizzard made the mistake of making Denounce a PvP talent instead of adding in a way it can be used for PvE, which is something I hope they do in War Within, seeing as how some Holy Paladins probably would like to wield a two-handed weapon instead of going sword and board, and if they wield a two-handed weapon now, they don't get Shield of the Righteous and have absolutely nothing to spend Holy Power on besides healing. Of course, even with Denounce added into players' kits for PvE, having a fallback filler spell is probably a wise idea. I had few gaps in my rotation with Denounce, but not none. Besides, if Holy Bolt has procs that can make it more powerful or instant, it'll be a welcome addition to the rotation, even if there are few gaps in that rotation. But I'm kind of getting off subject here. It would be nice if there were some kind of capstone for the Herald of the Sun hero talent, something that was active. Maybe one thing that comes to mind is Divine Illumination. That was a cooldown back in the day, and it would be an upgrade to Avenging Wrath that has some different graphics and additional effects, like maybe massively boosting haste while lowering mana costs. But something that would be even more awesome than that would be Heaven's Fury. If those beams had the ability to either heal or deal damage, it would be great. But when I ask myself what would Heaven's Fury replace, I'm drawing a blank. So I'm thinking maybe nothing. Maybe it wouldn't actually replace anything. I mean, does every new ability in the hero talents need to be a replacement for something else? Let's move on to the next talent tree. Lightsmith is another tree, and it would likely have to include a lot of self-healing and defensive abilities since it needs to appeal to Holy and to Protection. Shield Glare is an obvious shoo-in here. Retribution isn't going to want to touch that one. It would be a great damage reduction tool and could even be used to blunt incoming damage that other players might take. Shield of the Righteous would be a perfect thing to replace it with, though it would take the damage reduction mechanic off of yourself and put it on enemies instead, i.e. it wouldn't be a buff, but a debuff. And I'm not sure how well that concept would work in practice. Maybe it would need to directly heal allies as well for it to really work for Holy, but then it would also end up replacing Light of Dawn. Then again, why should an ability replace only one other ability? Phalanx is another great concept, and given that paladins have summoned angels to help fight before with the Guardian of Ancient Kings spell, I think Phalanx would look amazing and work great. For Holy, the angels that you summon could heal other players. For Protection, they could reduce the damage that they take. For both, the angels could knock enemies back who try to approach them. But the problem is, what spell do you replace to get the Phalanx spell? Divine Protection and Ardent Defender kind of came to mind, but as I started to think about it more and more, I realized what I said last time. Not every active ability that Blizzard brings to the table needs to be a replacement for an existing one. Brand new abilities that don't actually replace any of your other abilities should be on the table here. So maybe Phalanx would make a good capstone talent. But if Phalanx is the capstone, then another active ability should be in the mix for Lightsmith. I'm leaning in the direction of the Diablo 3 version of Smite. The Diablo 2 version is basically hitting the enemy with your shield, which Shield of the Righteous already gives us. So really, only the Diablo 3 version of Smite makes sense. I'd probably rename it to Chains of Light, make it a multi-target upgrade for Judgment, and basically all the things Judgment does on hit, Chains also does. Things like applying Glimmer to allies around the chains, or applying damage shields to those allies seems like a great idea. Damage shields in particular seem right up Lightsmith's alley. As for Templars, they could easily get the Condemn spell. Divine Storm or Shield of the Righteous could be great for a baseline to replace to get Condemn. Just plain an explosion of holy energy would look amazing, and there's no reason it couldn't be mixed with another damage element, like Fire to get Radiant damage, or Nature to get Lightstorm damage. Maybe even Arcane to get Divine damage. Of course, the self-buff about taking less damage after using it would have to be there for Protection, or it just wouldn't be appealing for anything other than soloing. Falling Sword would also be right up Templar's alley. And I'm using the phrase up your alley way too much in this video, but it's just plain true. For the longest time, Paladins have wished for a gap-closing ability like Charge, Death Grip, or Clash. Heck, Clash? That was an idea stolen from Paladin players and given to Brewmaster monks when Mists of Pandaria was in development. It was a big, big disappointment. But Falling Sword, that could replace Divine Steed and bring the Paladin straight to the given target. Buffs to it could plop a Consecration right where you fall, or pin the enemy down after using it. And Bombardment would make a really good capstone for Templars. It would need some kind of tanky buff to it, like maybe you get more self-healing while the bombardment is happening, or enemies in the bombardment deal less damage, something like that. I can't quite think of anything to replace to get bombardment, so maybe a good general rule for these capstones would be to make them brand new abilities while the other two new actives replace an existing ability. I hadn't really planned on that being the rule when I started typing this script out, but now that I think about it, it's an excellent rule to have. 2 new abilities per tree that replace existing abilities, and one that's completely new as a capstone reward. That's a really rewarding progression and really gets players excited. It kind of reminds me of Warlords of Draenor, where you got a bunch of passes while leveling up, and then at maximum level you unlocked a new talent that was usually an active ability. Though, looking at this setup a second time, I'm realizing that the single target rotation for Retribution is basically unaffected by these mods or upgrades or whatever you want to call them. Besides adding one more AoE cooldown to the mix, it does nothing for Retribution's single target, and that seems like a pretty bad oversight. Of course, since I limited myself to modifying existing abilities instead of flat out adding new abilities, at least other than the capstone, that means I have to pick an ability shared between Retribution and Protection to start with, and there's only so many of those. There's Judgment, which I've already modded for Herald of the Sun and Lightsmith. There's Word of Glory, Consecration, Flash of Light, Lay on Hands, Divine Shield, Rebuke, Hammer of Wrath. For a while I was thinking about upgrading Blade of Justice to Exorcism, but what equivalent could I have for Protection? Avengers Shield? I don't think so. I was thinking about upgrading Consecration into Bombardment, giving it a trade-off where it'll be more effective on single targets by concentrating more damage onto single targets, but then I noticed that Consecration isn't listed as one of the single-target Retribution rotation spells. In fact, it's not even listed as a multi-target Retribution rotation spell, which is a little surprising. Consecration's a pretty iconic Paladin spell. I suppose a version of Consecration that lasted longer and could concentrate more damage onto single targets might be strong enough to make the list, but that also might lead to ability bloat in the rotation. I'm leaning towards moving Falling Sword to the capstone and then making Exorcism an upgrade for Judgment. That deals additional damage, has a slightly longer cooldown, has additional effects versus the undead and demons, and can be upgraded further by the subsequent pick one of two talents. Mass Exorcism could damage multiple targets, while Excommunication would expand the effects that normally hit only undead and demons to also affect elementals, humanoids, beasts, and dragons. It's a thought, and at least this setup would affect both single-target and multi-target rotation for Retribution, and it would be handy enough for protection as well. Though I feel like I'm cheating myself by upgrading Judgment in 3 different ways here. Again, though, my options are a bit limited, and at least not every Paladin will upgrade Judgment. There'll be trade-offs to consider, and Judgment should be optimal in some situations, ideally at least. And at least the abilities that I'm upgrading Judgment to are pretty interesting and awesome in and of themselves. I sure hope that this second draft for the Templar hero talents is a little bit better than the first. My first impression was that Falling Sword was so awesome that it stood on its own, but then I realized, hey, shouldn't single-target rotations also be affected by these new abilities? I mean, new abilities won't get players excited unless they get to use those new abilities. And I really want there to be new abilities that get players excited as opposed to only having passive talents in the trees. Of course, even if Blizzard implemented exactly the concepts I've stated as I've stated them, there'd still be plenty of passives in the hero trees, both passives that play off of the upgraded or modded if you're a fan of So So Breezy's active abilities, and passives of the kind that Blizzard has already shown in their original deep dive. We're talking about talents that plain and simple grant percent increases to some or all of your abilities, or provide other passive buffs. Those aren't a bad idea in and of themselves, and having powerful game-changing passives in your hero trees is a good idea. Heck, the hero talents could even provide a choice between getting those massive passives or getting an active upgrade or mod ability. The point is, these passives are necessary, but they're not sufficient. Hero talents in general aren't a bad concept, but Blizzard's initial implementation of them, it just wasn't good, interesting, or above all else, fun. Blizzard can do better. The talent trees they gave us in Dragonflight prove that they can do better, and it's my sincere hope that they do better before War Within comes out. Odds are actually pretty good that they will do better. They certainly seem to be listening to feedback when it comes to class design, so hopefully we'll see them turn things around with these hero talents pretty soon.